Well, welcome everyone. I'm just going to briefly walk through the agenda. We're going to start with the welcome and some introductions. I just want to remind you that our voting is open for those two positions for our planning team, our leadership team. So we have a chair, a co-chair position open, as well as the secretary position open. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to vote yet, that link was sent out about a week ago. We want to make sure that you access it in the agenda right underneath our proposed dates for the next year. And make sure that if you haven't voted yet, you do that before lunch because we'll be closing the ballots at lunchtime to make sure we're announcing who's going to be on our team for next year. After I walk through the agenda, Carrie's going to get us started with the connector, and then we're going to have a presentation today from Dr. Alison Fox Resnick. We're looking forward to learning with her around systems and our literacy work. We'll go from there around 10:30 into our reflection time, breakout rooms, and we will go into a break. We'll come back and do our share outs and hear from our different organizations. And then we'll break for lunch around noon. We will get those legislative updates in the afternoon from 12:45 to 1:15. And then typically at the end of the day, we do have our work group time. We're thinking about restructuring that work group time. And so we're going to change that time for today, hear some celebrations from our group, and think about where we want to go next year into for that time period. We'll also announce the election results at the end of the day, and then we'll close out. And so we're excited to go ahead and get started today. I'm going to pass the baton now to Carrie, our co-chair or chair, co-chair, chair for next year. And she's going to get us started with the connector.
Good morning. I just want to say thank you all for taking your time to be with us today. We know how crazy spring is, and we know that because you're here today, that means you're not somewhere else. So just thanks for taking your time to be here with us. I'm just going to do a little connector today as I share my screen. That gives us an opportunity to reflect a little bit on where we've been this year and also think about where we're going to be going next year. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just take a little bit of time to reflect on what accomplishments have you made this year, and what do you feel like is still yet to come? So your task will be called a narrative pivot. They're going to be 6-word stories that we're just going to type into the chat, and then we're going to do a waterfall with all of them. So the first 6-word story that I'm going to ask you to write this morning is a mirror story. So in this story, I'm going to ask you to reflect on a success or a lesson that you learned this year. And then here's an example. So teachers found voices, students found agency. And then the second 6-word story that I'm going to ask you to write would be a window story. So asking you to really just reflect on a hope or a goal or a bold move that you intend to make in the coming year. So if you want to turn off your camera, you can. I'm just going to give you like 3 minutes to think through what would your 2 6-word stories be. And if you want to prepare and get them written in the chat, you can do so. Then at the end of our 3 minutes, I'm going to do a little countdown. And when I get to 0, then you can hit enter in the chat and we'll end up with a waterfall. Okay, so let me reflect on that, or let me rephrase that. You're going to do 2 6-word stories. One is going to be a mirror. The second one is going to be the window. All right. And I will start my timer now. Okay, our 3 minutes is about up. So if you can just make sure you have those typed in the chat, and then I'll do a 10-second countdown for our waterfall. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're going to take a minute to just read through all of the wonderful sharing that happened in the chat. The first one I landed on there, teachers are no longer crying in class. That feels like it needs a cheer. So much work around clarity, infusing coaching, collaborating, implementing new things with PA 146 and new resources. I think it's super encouraging to just think about all of the work that we've done this year, and even more exciting to think about where we're headed for next year. So thanks for sharing this morning. And equally, I'm looking forward to what our group has in store for us next year and all the work that we're able to do collaboratively with one another. So let's have a great day.
Thank you, Carrie. What a good way to get us started and in a positive thinking space as we move into our shared learning. I like to take a moment to introduce to some and present to others Dr. Alison Fox Resnick. Dr. Resnick is an educator, of a learning systems designer, researcher committed to the challenge of designing systems, tools, and experiences for learning that foster transformation of educational practice. As an independent consultant and staff member at the National Center for Research and Policy and Practice, she collaborates with educational leaders and organizations across the country. Alison is a co-author of the recent book Learning Together, which we all love, and if you don't have it, get it. Organizing Schools for Teaching and Learning and Student Learning. She also lives in Ann Arbor. Let's welcome Dr. Alison Fox Resnick. Feel free to pin her in your Zoom screen if that works better for you. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. I see some familiar names and faces and some new ones, so I'm really excited to think with you together. And I was sharing with the planning team that this group size of like 50 is so much fun for me. So often I'm in these Zoom rooms of 500 people or something where we don't get to really chat and think together. So please see this as a space you can unmute, a space you can ask questions. Let's just have a conversation for the next little bit about the really, really tricky work that you all do with teachers and leaders across the state. There's no magic recipes here, and I'm hoping we can jump right into thinking about some ways of thinking about the challenges and some ways of supporting the folks you work with to dive into those challenges as well. Let me share my screen. Okay. So what we're going to do today, some of you may have experienced some of it before if you were at the Literacy Institute last summer. So for those of you who are there, it might seem familiar, but part of what we're trying to do actually is show how some of this work that we can do together can actually be applied to any challenge or any goal we have for teachers or any new policy, that there's similar activities we can go through together that help us really unpack the complexity of teacher learning and practice so that we can design systems that support it in much better ways. You heard a little bit about me in that lovely introduction, but I do really feel like I sit at this intersection of a lot of different different roles I've played in the past or play currently. And I do work remotely for University of Colorado, but I do want to emphasize I'm deeply a Michigan parent, and I work remotely from Ann Arbor, and the work I get to do across Michigan is my favorite work. So here's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to try out a routine for unpacking the complexity of teacher practice. And I'm hoping you walk away with two things. One is what's something new I'm going to do right away in my work to support teachers. And we're going to play with the complexity of PA 146 today and the expectations in there. But also what I hope you see is that the set of thinking routines that we go through is something you could take to any team that you work with in the different school and district contexts that you work to do similar thinking about what the complexity of teacher practice and school leadership practice, I think, that's embedded in PA 146, really unpacking it so that we can design better systems. So I'm hoping you walk away with both of those. For anyone who's worked with me, you know that this value 5 from the organizational practices is the core of what I like to think about, that often we just think about what kids need and we don't think about what then the adults in our systems need. And when I break this down a little bit, it comes down to this. If we want kids learning to be different, then actually we really have to change educator learning. And in my experience, we're not supported to think about what that looks like. And so that's what I really like to dig into with people. And that means for teachers and leaders. So here's the reality, and you probably, in your years of experience in education systems, know this to be true. Any new policy, curriculum, or program can either, and often I would say most commonly, become just yet another tool that is floating around in our system, but everyone's basically just doing the same thing. Or it can become a tool that really supports teachers and leaders to engage kids in really different ways. So we're going to think about how that's true for PA 146 today. That's true for anything. You could put anything here, a new curriculum, a new assessment, a new app on a computer, right? Anything. This can be true. Let's play with it for PA 146. It could be just something that keeps floating around and nothing actually changes for kids. Or it could be something that really nudges us to dig into different ways we could engage kids. So here's why it's hard and why we fall into that. See if you feel seen by this. Education is really, really hard. We're constantly, no matter what our role, we're constantly juggling multiple things. We often have to make these urgent and rushed decisions. We're dealing all the time with unpredictable humans, whether they're 5 or 17 or 60, right? Unpredictable humans. And we're acting within really complex and really entrenched systems where there's kind of just a way you do things that it's really hard to change, right? And this is why it's really easy to fall into habitual and longstanding ways of making sense of what we're doing, even when we're trying to do something new. So some of you, maybe this is familiar. One of the tools that across the early math work and now across the literacy work, we've been thinking about this thinking tool of thinking traps. This is just a way of naming, and there's many more than we've named, but naming what are the habitual ways of thinking about learning and change in education that often happen, but actually from our own experience and research, we know don't work. We've seen over and over and over again, they don't work. What I want to emphasize here, and then I'll show you what some of them are, is that it's not about you as an individual or me as an individual doing the wrong thing. This is about these recipes that are built into our systems about what you do to try to change things in education. They're just the way things are done. And so they're what pushes our system are just like there's gravitational pull towards them. So the key though is we can't keep doing them. They don't work. So here's 6 that in working over the last few years with leaders across math and literacy, we've kind of settled on these 6 as some that are really powerful to think about. I want to name, there's so many other ones, and you could even break some of these down into more specific things. But just as a little exercise right now, why don't you think about what's one you've seen either yourself or someone else fall into in the last week, because these are everywhere. In the last week, will you just put in the chat the number of one you've seen either yourself fall into or someone around you fall into, or a system you exist within? Okay, lots of 3s, 5s, 6, 3, 4, 3 and 5. Yeah, 3 is really showing up as pretty common here. So I'll name that this has just become a powerful tool for a lot of leaders in the state, and maybe some of you have played with it already, of a way of like seeing it and naming it and then trying to think, well, what could we do differently? And that's where it gets really hard, because often we don't necessarily know what the thing to do differently is. So I'm hoping you see that the work we're going to do today is one way to learn and think and design our way out of some of these traps. And they are built, and I'll put in the chat for those of you who have not seen this tool, these design cards, which we've designed them as a card deck that can keep expanding. So there's gonna be some new ones coming out this summer. It's a way of having some tools that can help us learn and design out of these traps. So I did put it in the chat, and you can see the full set. But what you'll see is each card has some big ideas, and then some ideas about what you can do to design or think out of these traps. So I did just want to give you that as a resource, and you'll see it come up a few times as we dig in. So let's dig in. Here's what often happens. We identify a challenge or area for improvement, and then we choose and implement a solution. So that was really trap 3, right? Like if we can just pick the right thing to design perfectly and deliver it to someone, then change will magically happen. What we don't spend time doing, in my experience, is really unpacking the complexity of the change we're trying to support so that we can design something to actually create that change. We fall into the traps, we pick something we've done before or something that feels familiar, we throw it at teachers or leaders, and we magically expect things to be different, right? So what happens if we stop and slow down and really unpack the complexity of a change we're trying to support, or improvement we're trying to support, or a new policy? So here's this set of, they're almost like mini routines that form a big routine. And for those of you who are at Summer Institute last summer, these should look familiar. I'm going to give you a heads up. We're going to see how far we get. I think we'll probably get to about number 4, but I will preview number 5 and 6. I'm hoping you see these as activities you can take back to teams that you work with to do some of this thinking together. Okay, that's part of what's powerful about designing routines. And you'll see the way these are designed is they're really about how can we think together? How can we surface shared understanding and insights? Can we imagine something new? And the key thing at the bottom here is I hope you'll see that these are things you could adapt and use over and over for different groups of learners. So even thinking about how might I do this with teachers? What would it look like to do this with a school leadership team or a district leadership team or an ISD team? And you can put any content or any goal you have or any new thing that's on the table in the center here. Okay, so we're going to start with number 1. And here's, I want you to find something where you can make a list. We're going to start just with really digging into our guts and our deep feelings for ourselves about what we want for kids. So this could be a little Word document on your computer or a Post-it if you have it on your table. We're just going to initially make a list here for ourselves. So if you can grab something to write with. And I just want you to start making a list of words or phrases that come to mind. So what hopes, dreams, aspirations you have for Michigan children as readers and writers? any words or phrases that come to mind, go ahead and jot them down. You might think about what relationship will they have with reading or with writing? How do you want them to feel about it? What role do you want it to play in their lives? Keep adding to your list. And then the next nudge I might have for you is, so often we end up just thinking about test scores for kids. We end up kind of thinking about kids as numbers. My own opinion is that that's where we end up falling short for kids in terms of, we of course want them to have good scores, but we want so much more for them. And if we just focus on the scores, we actually lose track of those other things. So what would you add on your list beyond test scores? What do we want for our Michigan kids? And then I could have pulled from any of the essentials documents. I just, for the sake of what we're playing with a little bit today, was thinking about this disciplinary literacy essential practice 1. But you see this across the essentials documents, this idea that students read and write beyond being assigned or expected to do so. And then you can see some of the other language around there, like they just enjoy it, or they're interested in it, or they want to ask and answer questions, communicate with specific audiences. So maybe think, are there any words you would add to your list about why students will read or write in their lives? So this is in the design cards, framework I find really useful for expanding what we think about learning is that learning is not just what we want kids to know or teachers to know or understand. It's not just about what we want them to do. It's also about what we want them to, their identities, how we want them to see themselves and their role in relation to learning. So the question to ask here is, how do we hope children see themselves and their role in relation to reading, writing, learning, classroom, school, community, society? Keep going, right? So maybe think about, and really what's key here is these are actually all overlapping and messy, right? You can't separate them really, but it's useful to think about all three. So what I'd love for you to think about is what you would add for the becoming piece in particular. And I'll just give you an example of why it's important, right? So if we think about a goal, say, of like persevering through challenging texts, there's things kids need to know, and this is incomplete, right? But something a kid might need to know is strategies for reading challenging texts. I do need some skills too about like how, when, where do I use those strategies? But as we all know from supporting kids to read, that is never enough. And that's where I see becoming being really important, right? And some things you might put over there are things like, I'm a reader who can puzzle through things. I see myself as that. Or my role as a reader is to make sense of what I'm reading. I think we can all think of examples of kids who did not see that as their job versus kids who did see that as their job and how different that meant they showed up as readers, right? I think there's also this sense of like making sense of things I read can be really worth it. It's worth persevering because then I get something out of it, right? We've all seen kids who didn't really see the point of it. So I'm curious what else. So that's just an example of what adding this becoming layer can help us dig a little deeper into what we're trying to support for kids. So based on that, I'm curious what you would add to your list. How do you want kids to see themselves in their role in relation to reading? And I'll just give you some ways that sometimes kids end up thinking about it in case that jogs ideas about what you might add to your list. So sometimes kids, I think, unfortunately, too often, I'm already seeing my first grader fall into this, right? My role as a reader is to just do what the teacher tells me to do. So think about what you would add to your list to counter that, maybe. Or my role as a writer is to copy the structure format that my teacher showed me. That's really different than my role as a writer is to figure out ways to effectively communicate my ideas to others. That's really different, right? What would you add to your list? I think this is one kids fall into as well. I definitely saw this when I taught fifth grade. My role as a reader is to read all the words in a book. How is that different than my role as a reader is to critically reflect on texts, to compare with other texts, to discuss texts, to inform myself about the world, right? Those are really different ways to think about your job as a reader. Okay, so in a second, I'm going to make you pick your top 3 words on your list. So go ahead and take a look at your list. Let me put a little star next to your top 3 words. If you had to pick 3, I know it's hard. Okay, and we're going to make a word cloud because I want to see like what as a little community here we've come up with. So you can join at slido.com with this number, or if you want to grab your phone and just scan this QR code. And if you'd enter your top 3 words or phrases are fine too, but enter them one at a time so that we get a word cloud. Like about 20 of us have gotten in. If you're having a hard time getting in, let me know. Okay. Definitely keep adding if you have not yet, but let's see what as a community we thought about here. And I'd love in the chat or just unmute and share. What are you noticing? The biggest one is love and joy. Yeah. Liz, I love that. These goals are serving kids beyond K-12, right? If we're just focused on test scores, we're actually just supporting them to jump through the hoops of the K-12 system. We're not supporting them to be active, bring these skills into their broader worlds. Okay, so that's the first routine. And I just want to like step back and put our leader hats on for a second of what emerges in a group when you take 10 minutes, that's 10 minutes to do this activity. before you dive into thinking about something you're trying to support in a school, right? If we just go in and say, okay, we got to figure out how to implement PA 146 or implement this new curriculum, we all can know what feeling happens in people's bodies, right? If we instead say, let's take 10 minutes to think about what we want for our kids. Okay, how can we implement PA 146 to bring this to life for kids? That's a really different way of entering in for people. And it's also reminding people that they know what they want for kids. Too often we end up falling into like, what are we supposed to do as educators? Versus what do I know in my heart that I want for the kids that we serve? And how can I leverage different expectations or policies or curriculum towards those goals? And there, yeah, Catherine. So making us look at the bigger picture, right? And Chandra, that's so important. These things aren't tested or considered important. You just need to sit with that for a second, right? These things aren't tested and they aren't considered important often. And yet this is what we actually, when we take a second to check in with ourselves, believe are most important long-term for kids. Okay, so I'm going to actually take a screenshot of this because it's going to be important for us to keep looking at. All right. So now we can move to the next routine, bringing that with us. Any lesson or activity or policy can be enacted in ways that do bring this, oops, where did it go? Oh, it's lost now. This beautiful vision to life, right? Or don't, anything. So what happens if we really dig into what it means to bring it to life or not? So if I'm going to have us think about 3 different areas of PA 146. I know there's so many more. I know these are kind of surface level in some ways. But these are 3 pieces of it broadly. And any of those things could be enacted in a way that changes things for kids, makes things better for kids, moves towards this beautiful vision that we just put forward of kids loving reading and finding joy in reading. Or it could be enacted in ways that totally kill that and keep going with the things we've been doing. So here's the way I think about it is that every tiny move we make as a teacher or a school team sends a message to kids about these things here in green. Every little thing we do. And those add up over time to whether or not that beautiful vision in the word cloud that we just put together is reality for kids or not. So it's actually worth us stopping to think about what are all the little moves we're going to make that are either going to move us towards that vision or not. And that's what this little routine will help us do. So here's what we're going to think about in a moment. We're going to dive into a Google Doc together and do it all together. But here's the framing of the activity. And again, I want you to think about how you could place this onto anything you're working on with teachers or leaders. You actually stop and say, what will it actually look like or sound like in a classroom, or if we're thinking about a school-wide practice, if whatever this is, this lesson or this, I should have changed that to not say lesson, this lesson or activity or policy is brought to life in a way that does reflect our vision? And what are all the ways that we could enact this that would actually like totally kill this vision for kids? That's what we're going to try together. So I'm going to invite you into this Google Doc with me. Okay. So it's in the chat. Please join me. And you'll see I put in the three, you could call them pieces of PA 146. And I see someone already jumping right in, which I love. Go to the example you feel drawn to, or feel free to jump around. We're going to take 5 minutes to just brain dump. And we're thinking about teacher practice here. So if we think about identifying children with dyslexia, What are the ways a teacher could do that that would lead towards our beautiful vision of joy and love for reading? And what are ways that a teacher might enact it that would actually like totally squash that? If you feel more drawn to thinking about teaching disciplinary literacy across content areas, go there. If you feel drawn to thinking about intervention, go there. Feel free to jump around. Let's just take a moment to brain dump here. And I'm going to stop my share so you have a little more space on your screens. And you can get really small here. Like if you just think about a teacher doing a screener with a kid, there's 10,000 ways to do a screener. What are the tiny things a teacher might do or not do just while they're doing that tiny little screener with kids that would go in either direction from our vision here? And I'll actually put our vision up at the top here in case that's useful to be able to. What are ways that you might do a screener that would really make a kid not feel empowered? What are ways you could do it that would make them feel empowered? Yeah. If you've been mostly on one example, I might encourage you to go to pick one other one just to try it out. Go ahead and write one more idea. And then what I'd love for you to do is take a couple minutes to scroll through. And your challenge is to add one emoji or one comment. So engage in each other's ideas here. Your challenge is to add one emoji or one comment. Okay, I'm so curious, either in the chat or please unmute. I would love to have a chat here. What did you notice from doing that activity? Either as you were doing it or as you look across now, what are you noticing doing this activity opens up for us? Okay, so I see Jen and Michelle thinking about it. It's so useful to have everyone's thinking in one space. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're getting experiences from across, right? Mm-hmm. I think often what we end up doing is thinking about more surface level things that need to happen and not digging into like what's the nuance of how we actually need to enact any of these things for them to actually achieve the goals we have. That the goal is not just to, if we look at example one, make sure all the screeners happen, but actually the goal is for them to be done in a really particular way, right? That's a really different way to orient ourselves to what we're trying to support. Okay, so that's the second step. So the next step is actually zoom out, because there's the what we were just focusing on is what does the teacher need to be doing in this particular area of practice, right? So when they're identifying kids for dyslexia, we were just focused in on that, or when they're doing intervention, we were focused in on that. We actually want to zoom out at this point. So if we imagine, and this is clearly little kiddos in this picture, but any kiddos, right? If you imagine like we were just focused on particular moments between teachers and kids, but learning is not just like happens in these moments. We have to avoid this number one trap, right? And it's also not about these like one-off experiences. Learning for kids happens across all of these different interactions over time. That's how kids decide whether they're a reader, how they feel about reading. That's where kids develop more powerful reading skills. So zooming out means asking a bunch of different questions. So it could just be, okay, what needs to have happened in the previous 15 minutes versus the 15 minutes after? So if you think about the screener, are there things the teacher needs to do or say or not do or say before the screener or after the screener to change how kids feel about it? Or maybe earlier in the day or later in the day? maybe earlier in the school year or later in the school year. These are different lenses as we keep zooming out. And then what I'm also going to encourage us to think about is what needs to or cannot happen in the broader school context. So we're going to try playing with that. What we're going to do is if you move to the second tab, or sorry, tab number 3, I'm going to go ahead and paste in what we had from before. So you'll see that in a moment. And what I want us to focus on now is these yellow parts. So now we're thinking, before we were thinking about teacher practice, now let's think about school system or leader practice. How do schools or leaders need to be organized around identifying kids with dyslexia? What should be happening in leader practice or school systems in a way that brings to life our beautiful vision or does not? And again, like last time, feel free to jump to whichever example you feel drawn to, but we're working in those yellow zones, but I will bring forward our ideas from before in case it's useful. And again, everything from the tiniest thing to the biggest thing matters, right? Like what specific words might a principal use or not use as they're framing this as a goal? What might happen or not happen in professional learning? What does, I don't know, the school schedule count, like the schedule of the day even need to look like? These are different layers we may think about. Okay, we can do something similar to what we just did. Go ahead and finish up what you're writing and then take a moment to look across. Feel free to add more ideas. And then let's engage too with comments or emojis. Really powerful and nuanced things emerging here, right? About, in some cases, pretty subtle differences that actually make a huge difference for how teachers are experiencing the system or how kids are experiencing the system. Are there any ahas, noticings that you're sitting with after doing this layer of the activity?
Allison, may I add a comment?
Always, please, Tanya.
Thank you. This is Tanya. I think what I'm seeing as you've taken us through each of these routines is that sometimes I feel we get wrapped up in like we don't know what to do. We're so nervous. We have all of these things happening, and how do we really embed? But when you look at all of the emojis and you look at all of the things that the team has written down under teacher practice that brings the vision to life, that list is just growing and growing. And you see those emojis and you see those comments, and in the chat, that's what people are really saying.
Yes.
So it's just, I think it's about not, we get so wrapped up that it's easy to stay in that space. But really, we all have all these visions and know what to do. It's just about helping us bring it to the table and working with our administrators or our teammates to really say, hey, we know what to do. Let's just keep going.
That's so beautiful, Tanya. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. I think if I can get on my own soapbox for a second, I think just like we were talking about kids learning in school just to do what the teacher told them, I think the system also tells educators that that's our job too, to just do what we were told, right? So we see the new policy, we're like, what do we have to do? That's a really uninspiring place to start, a pretty soul-killing place to start, and it doesn't lead to better things for kids. Instead, if it's, we know what we want for kids, we've been here, we're on the ground, we know kids, how do we want to bring, in this case, PA 146, or put anything there, any new curriculum, any new policy? How do we want to bring this into our system and leverage it towards what we know is best for kids? That's a really different design challenge to bring everyone into that feels inspiring, hopefully. And like we actually all have wisdom and knowledge at the table versus I just have to look at my instructions and follow my marching orders. So you might think about, again, I just want you to keep thinking about who might I do this with? Where might I have this conversation and what might that open up for people? Okay, we're going to move to the next step. The big idea here, share my screen, which I actually think is another step we skip so often. We just say the thing we're going to do. We don't say the thing we're going to stop doing or do less of. So to actually figure out how to get somewhere new, we actually have to name both where we're starting and where we're trying to go. We actually have to name that as a shift. That creates a really different kind of goal to orient our learning design towards. So drawing on everything we've just done, let's move to step 4 in our document. And here I just want us to brain dump. You see there's a bunch of rows. You can write as many as you want. If we think about, and ground yourself in the last 3 activities, and if you need to go back to them, go back to them. If we want this vision for kids, and we've started to think about what it's going to matter about what teachers and leaders do in order for that vision to be brought to life. What are some shifts we will need to support? So there's some possible sentence stems. You do not need to feel locked into them, but just to give you an example, the point is to name what we're going to do less of or stop doing next to what we're going to do instead. So actually, Tanya, you just surfaced a really important one, right? This, like, we're going to support teachers and leaders to not just see policies as a checklist of things to do, but as a tool to bring in to leverage towards what we want for kids. That's a really powerful shift to name. So go ahead and just on your own play with how you might name a shift. It could be small or big. Be something about what teachers are going to need to do differently, what leaders are going to need to do differently. I see people already reading some other ones. Love it. Will you just double check that your shift that you tried out has both what we're going to stop doing or do less of and what we're going to do more of? I think it's an interesting tendency we have in education to be afraid of saying what we're doing wrong or not well and just kind of say things we want to do instead. I think what I've experienced is if we can actually name what we're trying to move away from, it gives people a way clearer sense of direction. Heidi, I love your, Heidi asked a really good question in the chat. Heidi, I'll get to it in a second. Okay. Take a moment to look across. And what I want you to do, you can have 2 votes. You can just put an X. You see I put this column. We're going to dig into 2 of these just to play with what it looks like to dig further into what unpacking a shift. Will you read through and just with an X, pick 2 that you would find really juicy to dig into together today? There any more seconds to vote? All right, I'm gonna just drop one thing in and then we'll move to the next step. So, all right. So now we've actually moved towards identifying a shift we would want to support, right? We have quite a few here. I'm going to propose, just so that we are thinking about leaders and teachers, as we think about our 2, tell me if you don't like this plan. I'm going to propose we think about these 2, one about teachers and one about leaders. Does anyone feel really upset about that idea? Okay. I want to emphasize, though, you could pick any of these and keep moving down the line, right? In terms of these activities. So there's 2 tools that I find really useful for unpacking the learning involved in any of these shifts, because it's one thing to name the shift. It's a totally different thing to say, well, what do I need to support people to learn to do then, right? So I'm going to move over here to tab 5. I guess I need to share my screen. And I'm going to remind you about this framework I introduced super briefly. I'm going to put it up here so we can all see it. about learning being this at this intersection of knowing, doing, and becoming. Now, we talked about that with kids. This is also a very powerful framework for thinking about teacher or leader, any educator, really anyone's learning. What we're going to do is we're going to go back and grab these two shifts. And I'm actually going to reword this just a tiny bit. So this one, let's frame it in terms of teachers will stop using supplements not aligned to the core and start supporting them to maximize core resource and start. Okay. So this is one of our goals that we thought we might play with a little bit. So the task now is to think about, for teachers to do that, what will they need to know? What will they be able to do? And how will they need to see themselves in their role? Now, as you saw above, it's a messy intersection. So sometimes people get really stuck in like, is this knowing or doing? Some of them really fit across. I don't want you to get stuck there. If you're not sure where it goes, but you're like, this is part of the complex learning here, I have this box down at the bottom to add those ideas. The point is not to correctly place it in the right cell in our table. The point is to use this framework to see deeper into the complexity of learning. So I'm going to put that one there, and then I'll put the leader one down below and go ahead and start brainstorming, and then we'll dig into what questions or wondering people. Okay. I know this might be a new way of unpacking learning. Are there questions that came up for people? Or things you're wondering about? So go ahead and finish writing whatever you're writing, and then definitely take a moment to look across. And what I encourage you to think about is, what does unpacking learning in this way do that's really different than how we often think about goals for any learner, but especially teachers or leaders? How does this help us? What does this help us see that we often don't stop to see? So here's what I think all of our own experience and also studies of trying to support teachers or leaders to enact new kinds of practice to make some of these shifts we're talking about. We often end up just designing for knowing and doing. And we don't design for supporting these really tricky, I'll name that, shifts in what people see their job as. And that's where study after study and our own experience after experience with different curriculum or different initiatives coming into schools, that's where we don't actually see what teachers or leaders are fundamentally doing change. We're teaching them some surface level skills or knowledge, but we're not helping them embed that in a new way of thinking about their job. Right? So some of these becoming goals here, like, if I think my job is just to fill time with worksheets and activities, if I'm not supported to move out of that vision of my job, to see my job as to support really rich core instruction, then I'm not going to feel like making this shift is worth it to me or right for me, no matter how many skills or knowledge you give me, right? Same with leaders. If I often leaders start to think about it as, I just have to make sure professional learning happens. You can think about a principal's role, for instance. My job is to make sure there's professional learning, like plugging those holes over there. That's really different than my job is to support teacher learning over time. If we don't support that shift in your identity about what it means to do your job well, then no matter how many new tools or resources or skills or knowledge that we expose people to, they're going to keep doing their jobs in the same way. So that's just in our last few moments. There's one last piece that I'll show you quickly. And this may be familiar to some of you, but the last piece is then to think about, how does learning unfold? So a lot of you thought about number 3 when you thought about traps you've seen recently. This is how we think about number 3. We think about it as someone doesn't have something, then we deliver the perfect thing, and then they magically have it, right? So you can think about all sorts of examples that were probably why everyone put 3 earlier. First, kids, we do it, right? We're just going to deliver the perfect phonics activity, and then they're going to have it. Or with teachers, if we just deliver the new curriculum, they'll have it. Or I'd have the best 90-minute PD. They're going to have it now. Or a book study. We'll just plug a book study in. I want to emphasize, none of these are bad things. It's that on their own, they really don't do very much. Right? Or I'm going to have the best coaching cycle, and then this is going to be magically changed for the teacher, right? Or letters training. Again, none of these things are bad on their own. If we assume they are these magic carpets that are going to carry people from one way of teaching to a totally different way of teaching, then that's not going to be what happens. Okay, same for leaders. We think if we just give principals a really good 90-minute PD, or if we just send the email that's perfect, right? We're going to revise that email until it says exactly what we need it to say. or this is when we do a lot. We'll just give leaders a checklist for what to look for. Then they'll magically support teachers differently. Again, none of these things are wrong on their own, but they do not fix anything. They do not change anything if they're in isolation. Okay, here's how learning actually unfolds. It's not a straight line. It's kind of, it can look like all of these things. And if we think about anytime we learn something new, we might identify with one of these arrows, right? For the sake of this work, we've been using this arrow here. I want to emphasize, like, even this one isn't right, because it talks about, it makes us think that we're just going to be constantly moving upwards. I think it's really more of this scribble, actually, but for the sake of this activity, here's a framework I find really useful for making sense of educator learning. And actually, you can apply it to any learner, kids too. So this framework puts forth that there's kind of three big phases that someone might go through. One is resistance. So this is when a new expectation is put on their practice. Someone might actively this resistance is I actively resist or oppose it. In fact, I'm just not doing it. We can probably all think of examples of this. The other two phases, there's some subtle but really important differences. So in compliance, I'm doing it. I'm doing the new thing you asked me to do, but I'm doing it in a really superficial or inflexible way. And I'm doing it because this is key. You told me to, or I think my principal wants me to, or the state told me to, not because I believe it's something that is valuable or that I would do if I had my choice, right? Often this is because people see something as arbitrary or maybe unattainable, and they're not adapting it for their kids in really meaningful ways or for their schools. This is different than internalization, where you're enacting it more flexibly and responsibly. You're doing it. This is key because you want to do it, because you see it as a powerful, negotiable, enabling, attainable thing to do for kids, or if you're a leader, for teachers. Now, a couple of things I want to emphasize. In this framework, actually, compliance is a good thing, because that's where we can start digging in and learning with people. If people aren't trying anything, then we don't have a real starting point. If people start to try something, then we have a place to move from to help them figure out how to make it really powerful for their kids, or if they're leaders, how to make it really powerful for their teachers, right? What this framework helps us do is think about how educators are going to move along these messy trajectories. They're going to go back and forth. They're going to be in different places. Helps us break down what learning might look like over time, rather than just focusing on the end goal. So because of time, we're not going to fully dig into this, but I do just want to show you what this next step might look like. And there's lots of resources I can point you to for further understanding this this tool that we can use. But the final step I really recommend for really fully unpacking the complexity of what you're going to be trying to support is to think about, if this is my goal in this case, what might resistance look like or sound like? What might compliance look like or sound like? What might internalization look like or sound like? If you're getting ideas and you want to jot them down, please do. And then the key piece is, why might that be happening? What might teachers be believing or thinking in this case? What this helps us do is get a little more nuanced into what's actually happening for our learners, because the teacher who's in resistance is going to need different kinds of support from us than the teacher in compliance. And then if we were to fully go through this, which I can point you to some sessions I've done with folks where we do, and if you're wanting more ways of thinking about this, there's lots of different reasons you might be in compliance. It might be, I'm overwhelmed. It might be, I don't know where to start. It might be, I don't believe in this, but I'm doing it because you told me to. Those three teachers actually need really different kinds of support based on why they're showing up in compliance. So stopping to really, so this example someone just wrote, I'm afraid of change. If we can say, oh, this teacher is afraid of change versus this teacher doesn't believe in it, Those are two different ways we might enter to support that teacher. So this activity can help you really unpack what's going on for our learners underneath. Okay. All right, we are rapidly running out of time. There's a really good question about if Heidi said, if I were going to do this live in person, would I still use a Google Doc like this, or would I use another method? She said, I'm hoping to use this framework with a group this week, which I love. There's so many ways to do these. If I were in person, I'm a big fan of Post-its and poster paper. So you can imagine for this activity, giving people a bunch of Post-its and then having these two categories up on a whiteboard maybe and going and putting those Post-its up. Or if you had a lot of smaller groups, you could have people do it in tables. That's what we did at the Literacy Institute. Everyone had a poster at their table and they were putting Post-its down or writing on the poster. That said, you can also always use this Google Doc. Feel free to copy it and take everything we did out and use it with groups in that way. But you do not need to use the Google Doc if you're in person. All of these can be done with just poster paper and Post-its in a really fun way, I think. I did put in this last tab. I put the slides from today. Feel free to adapt and use them. Feel free to adapt and use this workspace. If you're wanting to dig a little bit farther, and I'll put the video of this in too. There's also video of, we had more time in the Literacy Institute to go through these steps. So there's video of that. I'll put the link in if that's useful for you. I will say a lot of this work we've also done, especially in the Systems Leader Network and the Institute for the Math work. Again, slightly different goal, right? We were thinking about the content of early math in that case, but the ways of thinking about unpacking the complexity of learning are the same. And you can see me explaining it in different ways or different ways we've dug into it. So hopefully those resources are useful. Are there any other questions about how you might use these or anything else? Okay, well, I would love in the chat as a final thing, can you put one group of people you can imagine trying some of this out with? Just so we can crowdsource. So I see Jen thinking about literacy coaches, Lynn thinking about countywide administrators, love it. Yep. Yep, teachers. What I'm hoping you're seeing is this set of activities you can go through with any group of people for any goal. And what they can help build is a really different way of thinking about learning in our systems and the changes we're trying to have for kids and teachers and leaders. All right. It was such a joy to think with you today, and be in touch if there's ways I can help you think about adapting this for other groups of people.
See a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you so much, Alison. We appreciate you supporting our learning and shifting our thinking around how we're applying this work in our local settings. And as you're putting the thank yous in the chat, I want you to start to think a little bit more about some of the reflection questions that have already been lifted, even if it's that last box where we were talking through the trajectory, resistance, compliance, and internalization. When you're thinking about those that you're working with, we're going to give you some processing time in small groups to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes or so and share your thinking. How is this work applying to your local settings? What are you taking away? We heard a little bit already about how you can use some of the facilitation moves in in-person settings, but what are some other things you're holding on to? I'm going to invite you to go into your breakout rooms and share, but we want to thank you, Dr. Alison Fox Resnick, for joining us and pushing our thinking forward.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back. We could see a few of those microphones moving in different rooms, and looks like you were engaged in some rich conversations. Just before we move into our break time, we want to give maybe two rooms an opportunity to share out what was some of your thinking, what were some of the things that bubbled up for your group. I think Carrie said someone was willing to share from room 10, and we're going to have someone share from room 1. So when you're ready, feel free to unmute and share a little bit of your thinking.
I can share. I'm from room 1. And
thanks, Catherine.
Yes, of course. I can hopefully capture some of the things we talked about. First of all, we just really appreciated the space and time to be able to go through this process. I think, I've seen it several times before, and it's a good, come back to thing, right? Like once you move away from it, you move away from it. And so it's great to come back and revisit all these steps and how important it is to do that zooming in and zooming out. Was also really nice to be able to hear what everyone else was experiencing. We really connected to what other people were saying, and there's so much commonalities in the work that we're doing. And we are excited to do this with our leadership teams and walk through this process. Sometimes we don't always get enough time to walk through this, but even if we were able to start this process, there's a lot of new initiatives obviously coming out next year that we want to be careful of, making sure that we're looking at it from all aspects, and really reflecting on times that we didn't do that, right? Like where we did go through the process and then didn't go through that process, and then we wonder why things didn't work. And now it's easy to see when you look back at these steps why maybe one of those didn't work. So it was just great to bring all of this back to the table so that we could listen and learn from all of you.
Yes, thank you for lifting that. It's so important for us to pull ourselves out of that thinking trap of one professional learning event, but bringing it back and thinking about how it applies to what we're experiencing right now in our local settings. We're all grappling with, change and the legislation and a lot of moving pieces. So hearing one another's voices is, very, very helpful in thinking through this together and thinking about how we're all moving along that messy trajectory, because it's not a straight line, right? It's, we're moving from one phase to the next. Someone from room 10.
So we talked about how this process could really be used at lots of different situations. So at the grade level, the school level, the county level, and how the process might look a little bit different in each of them. We talked about, sometimes it might be nice to even use this combination of on a Google Doc and writing on posters so that everybody feels comfortable and to put out their ideas and not necessarily in front of the whole group, because sometimes people don't feel comfortable with that. We talked about how this can help collaborate or calibrate what we're doing inside of our buildings so that everybody's on the same page. I also linked it to the book. It's called Transforming Teaching Through Curriculum-Based Professional Learning, and how we were really thinking about how do we embed that professional learning across the year rather than thinking about it in just those one and dones. And I found a lot of connections to that work. If you haven't read it, it's a great book. And did I miss anything, Group 10?
Thanks for sharing out, Carrie. Yes, we can use a variety of the resources and structures that were used today. And thanks for lifting another resource. You said did you say you put it in the chat?
No, but
okay.
I can.
Well, we appreciate your share out and your time. But and to honor your time as we it's about 10:45. I want to give you a little bit of a break since we're virtual.